Sodom and Gomorrah is the name of two neighboring cities from the time of the patriarch Abraham, whose story is told in the book of Genesis. According to the biblical account, these cities were burned because of the severity of their sins. Given this, many of us wonder, what sins did these two cities commit? What is your story? Why is the expression sodomite used to refer to male homosexuals? Very well, my dear listener, we will be answering all these questions in this video. Join us until the end on this fascinating journey through the sacred scriptures, and let's discover together the true story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Before delving into this topic, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so that YouTube notifies you every time we publish a new video. Let's get started. The Ancash earthquake of 1970, also known locally as the 70 earthquake, was an earthquake that occurred on Sunday, May 31, 1970, at 3:23 p.m. local time. It reached a magnitude of 7.9 on the moment magnitude scale and an intensity of grade 9, violent on the Mercalli scale. It was widely felt throughout the coast and mountains of the department of Ancash and in bordering regions of the south and north of Peru. Nothing foreshadowed the misfortune that was about to occur. Suddenly, a seismic movement of great magnitude began to be felt in a large part of the country of Peru. The strength of the earthquake of 7.9 on the seismological scale at that time, and whose epicenter was 44 kilometers southwest of the port of Chimbote, caused millions of people to leave in terror, who felt that the earthquake was increasing in intensity as the seconds passed. Scenes of panic followed one another then. Adults and children ran to open places in search of safety, others remained in their homes, and women cried out in the middle of the slopes, "Lord, appease your anger." When the movement finally stopped, the population returned to their homes without imagining that the magnitude of the tragedy had tragically hit the Calajan de Huelas, with the city of Yungay being the most affected. Yungay was not only shaken by the earthquake. The most ferocious tragedy occurred 10 minutes later. The eastern slope of the snow-capped Huascaran fell away, unleashing a flood that headed toward the city of Yungay, destroying everything in its path. The city was buried, with only the 4 palm trees of the Plaza de Armas as mute witnesses of the catastrophe, turning into a large cemetery, leaving approximately 20,000 dead under the rubble and only 300 people. For the first few days, planes could not land to provide aid due to the dense cloud of dust and dirt that covered everything. In some way, it could be said that the Yungay city suffered the judgment of God. On one occasion, I had the opportunity to talk with a person who lives in a place called Caranga, which is near Yungay. That person witnessed the earthquake of the year 70 and told me that in Yungay there was a lot of idolatry. It was a prosperous city. The people boasted a lot about the beauty of their city. He also told me that 3 missionaries were martyrs in that city. I don't know if the latter is true, only God knows. But all this leads us to think that the city of Yungay suffered judgment from God, and this reminds us of the cities Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah is the name of the two neighboring cities from the time of the patriarch Abraham, whose story is told in the book of Genesis. It is not known who founded these cities, but it is believed that they were founded by the Canaanites or the Amorites. According to the biblical story, these cities were burned as divine punishment for the severity of their sins. Today, this is one of the most controversial passages in the Bible. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is often used to warn about the punishments that come with sin and disobedience to God's law. The Genesis passage shows God as an implacable judge. From the story of Sodom and Gomorrah comes the expression sodomite, which originally refers to the name of the inhabitants of Sodom. However, the term sodomite has been popularly used to refer to male homosexuals. The term has also been used to refer to people who practice acts of perversion. Usage depends on ideological context and interpretation, but in any case it is based on the passage whose history we summarize below. Sodom and Gomorrah were part of the 5 cities that were in the fertile Jordan Valley. The region was of extraordinary beauty and fertility. Its appearance then was so attractive that it was compared to the garden of Jehovah and the land of Egypt. This beauty and abundance was perhaps the reason why Lot, when separating from his uncle Abraham, chose the plain of Jordan where Sodom was, the city in which he came to live. Let's read Genesis chapter 13 verse 10 onwards. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was all irrigated, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Then Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and Lot went towards the east, and they separated from each other. Abram camped in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tents as far as Sodom, but the men of Sodom were very wicked and sinners against Jehovah. Dear ones, Abraham was not throwing Lot out of the promised land. In the previous verses, he simply told him to choose to go further north or further south. But Lot's eyes went in another direction. In the end, he chose to go to a land similar to Egypt. The promised land is located between mountains and valleys that are washed by rain from heaven and not by a river. But to the east. Leaving Canaan is the Jordan Valley, bathed by the river of the same name, which is a perennial source of water, similar to Egypt, which is bathed by the Nile River. In Deuteronomy, the difference between Egypt and the promised land is explained. Let's read Deuteronomy chapter 11 verse 10 to 12. The land into which you enter to take it is not like the land of Egypt from which you came, where you sowed your seed and watered it with your foot like a vegetable garden. The land to which you are passing to take it is a land of mountains and plains, which drinks the waters of the rain from heaven, land of which the Lord your God cares. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year to the end. Lot liked the lifestyle of Egypt, where one had access to river water at all times, no matter what one did, in contrast to depending on the rain from heaven, which God sends if one lived in obedience. Lot could have stayed in the promised land, but he didn't. He preferred a lifestyle similar to that of Egypt. He preferred material riches to spiritual ones. He preferred the security that the river gave him instead of depending on God. He preferred the easy life. He did not care that there was a lot of evil in that region. As we see, he gradually approached Sodom until he settled there. Lot's choice was very expensive for him. He will encounter many risks and problems as a consequence of choosing material inheritance over spiritual inheritance. First, he was kidnapped, then, as we will see, the city where he lived will be destroyed, his wife will die, and his daughters will go astray. In the end, he who sought this world lost it, but we will leave this for last. Now, despite the beauty and abundance of good things in these cities, Sodom and Gomorrah are the most beautiful of them all. They were also known for their evil. Instead of living according to God's instructions, the men of Sodom were greatly evil and sinners against Jehovah. In Genesis chapter 18 verse 20 it says, "Then the Lord said to him, because the cry against Sodom and Gomorrah increases more and more, and their sin has become extremely serious." Given this, many of us ask ourselves, what was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, the Holy Scriptures have the answer for this. The main sin associated with Sodom and Gomorrah is homosexuality and sexual violence. As humanity went astray, men and women began to exchange God's use of sex, filling it with vile and shameful passions. Paul made a list of sinful behaviors that human beings began to practice when they turned away from God. In Romans chapter 26 and 27 he says, "For this reason God gave them over to shameful passions. For even his women changed the natural use for that which is against nature, and in the same way also the man, leaving the natural use of the woman. They became inflamed in their lasciviousness toward each other, men committing shameful deeds with men,
and receiving in themselves the due retribution for their error." Likewise, when mentioning the sexual immorality of Sodom and Gomorrah, Jude in his letters said the following words, "Like Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which in the same way as those having committed fornication and pursued vices against nature, were put, for example, to suffer the punishment of eternal fire." Another version of the Jude passage reads as follows, "And Sodom and Gomorrah, along with the neighboring cities given over like them to lust and homosexuality, suffered the punishment of perpetual fire. Dear listener, what Jude called unnatural vices are often called alternative ways of life in our modern age. The term sounds so innocent in our culture, but it denotes sexual behavior that is unnatural and offensive against God. When we read Genesis chapter 19 verses 5 through 8, it is very easy to see what both Paul and Jude had in mind. The society of Sodom was immersed in rampant sexual immorality, including homosexual acts and aggressive rape. Now, apart from homosexualism, other sins that are very serious were practiced in Sodom and Gomorrah. 1. They were idle because of the abundance of wealth, but they did not help the needy. Rather, they were arrogant and proud. Let's read Ezekiel chapter 16 verses 49 and 50. Behold, this was the iniquity of Sodom your sister, pride, satiety of bread, and abundance of idleness she and her daughters had. And she did not strengthen the hand of the afflicted and the needy, and they were filled with pride, and made an abomination before me. And when I saw it, I removed them. 2. They committed adultery, lived a lie, and defended the evildoer. In Jeremiah chapter 23 verse 14 it says, "And in the prophets of Jerusalem I have seen clumsiness. They committed adulteries, and walked in lies, and strengthened the hands of the wicked, so that no one would turn from his wickedness. They were all to me like Sodom, and their inhabitants like Gomorrah." 3. They published their sin without being ashamed of it. Let's read Isaiah chapter 3 verses 8 and 9. "For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen. For their tongue and his works have been against the Lord to irritate the eyes of his majesty. The appearance of their faces testifies against them. Because like Sodom they publish his sin, they do not conceal it." 4. They were poor souls of them, because they accumulated evil for themselves. Dear listener, the residents of Sodom had become so wicked. When Abraham interceded with God for that city, not even 10 righteous people could be found among them. As we can read in verses 28 to 32 of chapter 18 of Genesis, Abraham reduced the number from 50 righteous successively to 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. The question arises, why didn't Abraham continue asking below 10? It is possible that he did not dare. Perhaps he was struck by doubts as to whether Lot was really lost, and this worried him so much that he decided not to continue asking. Surely, if he had insisted to the point of asking if God would have destroyed the city, if there was only one righteous person in it, God would have answered him, "If there is a righteous man in the city, I will remove him from the city, for I will not destroy a righteous man with that city." And how do we know that God would have responded like this? Because that's how it actually happened. Given Abraham's doubts, it turns out that there was a righteous man in the city, and God knew him. He was Lot. The Apostle Peter in his second letter wrote that Lot grieved his righteous soul every day, seeing and hearing their wicked deeds. For this reason, 2 angels went to Sodom to save the righteous man. In Genesis chapter 19, it says, "So the 2 angels came to Sodom at evening, and Lot sat at the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he stood up to meet them, and bowed down to the ground, and said, 'Now, my lords, I beseech you, come to your servant's house and stay, and wash your feet, and in the morning you will arise and go on your way.' And they answered, 'No, we will stay in the street tonight.' But he persisted with them very much, and they went with him, and entered his house. And he made a feast for them, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. My dears, we see that when the angels came to Sodom, Lot was sitting at the city gate. Those who did so held the public office of judges. This makes it clear to us that Lot not only resided in that community, but also, upon entering the judicial career, he had integrated into public and political life. We are also struck by Lot's hospitable attitude when offering accommodation in his house to travelers. It was normal that they needed to wash their feet, having traveled that dusty road from the plains of Mamre to Sodom, with open footwear like sandals, typical of that time. Therefore, in addition to the relief it implied, this gesture was a way of expressing and offering hospitality to visitors. At first, the travelers, in order not to cause inconvenience, were reluctant to accept the invitation, and suggested spending the night in the streets, or in the square. But Lot, aware of the danger they would have been in because of the atmosphere in the city, insistently begged them to spend the night at his house. We, who know the circumstances that occur in our large cities, especially at night with growing crime and violence, are increasingly sensitive to citizen insecurity. Let's continue with the biblical story. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, all the people together, from the youngest to the oldest, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men that came to thee this night? Bring them out, so that we may know them. Then Lot came out to them at the door, and shut the door behind him, and said, I beseech you, my brethren, do not do such evil. Behold now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. I will bring them out to you, and do with them as you see fit. Only do nothing to these men, since they came in the shadow of my roof. And they answered, Get away there. And they added, This stranger has come to live among us, and will he become a judge? Now we will deal worse than them. And they did great violence to the man, to Lot, and approached to break the door. These citizens of Sodom clearly came to homosexually abuse and rape those 2 visitors. It is an astonishing display of depravity. Notice what Lot said to them. I beseech you, my brethren, do not do such evil. This was a difficult argument for Lot. He and the men of Sodom had completely different standards for deciding what was evil and what was not. The men of Sodom thought about seeking pleasure, and they did not care that Lot thought this was evil. Now, but we are astonished that Lot was willing to give his daughters to men, as well as the sinful desires of these men. The offer is horrible and cannot be justified. The men of Sodom put on a shocking display of depravity, but we are equally shocked by Lot's willingness to offer his daughters to the mob. As we are dealing with the sinful desire of said mob, we can understand this terrible description a little more when we consider the low position of women in the PI Christian world and the very high position of guests. It was assumed that guests should be protected more than the family itself. Now notice the following words. This stranger has come to live among us, and will he become a judge? The aggressors mocked the political influence that Lot seemed to have in the city, attacked him, and would have destroyed him and his family if the angels had not intervened with their supernatural powers, blinding that uncontrollable mob. Obviously, the work of wounding the blind men was supernatural. Now, the crowd had a physical blindness that matched their spiritual blindness. Let's continue with the biblical story. The men said to Lot, Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law and your sons and your daughters, and all that you have in the city, bring them out of this place. For we are going to destroy this place, because the cry against them has risen before the Lord. Therefore, Jehovah has sent us to destroy it. Then Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to take his daughters, and said to them, Arise, leave this place, because Jehovah is going to destroy this city. But it seemed to his sons-in-law that he was mocking Lot. In effect, Lot was in an extreme situation. As a resident of that city for several years, he had become accustomed to tolerating what he himself described as perversity. He had seen his daughters grow and develop, who would marry young people adapted to that environment. For this reason, when he spoke to his future sons-in-law to warn them that they should also run away with him, they laughed. Lot had lived in a world as long as one of them, with no noticeable difference, that they took his grave warning as a joke. It is clear that Lot, having chosen that place to live, was separated from God's will for his life, and it was also evident that he had neither witnessed to his faith nor defended his own values. This situation is similar to the current situation of many so-called Christians, who spend their lives compromising their Christian values in an adaptation to the values of other people who do not have a knowledge of God or a personal relationship with Him. In this way, instead of bringing people to Christianity, they drive them away.
And so we come to the end of this Bible study. Thank you for being part of our Wisdom channel. God bless you greatly. Thank you for watching Daily Logos, we inspiring faith and impacting change.